Hi, everyone. So excited to be here today, especially with my wonderful panel. We've got a new uh, individual today with us. We're so honored and privileged to have Joanne Merrick. I was able to meet Joanne through Charles Caldwell's show, which is an exciting show, and I advocate anybody who hasn't seen it to take a look at it. And you can do it by just looking at past shows, so you don't always have to be there right on the button when we start. And naturally, Catherine Chadwick. So, with that being the word of relevance, and since Joanne's here first, I won't let her go first, so I'll just move
Thank you.
Joanne there.
Thank you, Don.
You bet. Always trying to be helpful. Uh,
You read my mind.
yeah, well, I don't want to put you in that position. Um, so, Charles, first thoughts on relevance?
Well, thanks for having me back, and great to see Joanne and Catherine here as well. The one thing I would say about relevance is that context matters. And in a lot of misunderstandings that happen in business or in people's personal lives come out come about because the context of a certain situation is dropped out. We see that a lot in the global geopolitical environment where people take short snippets of what a leader has said and they just share that 10 or 15-second snippet, which takes out all the context and all the relevancy, so that you then have a swarm of misinformation around that. So I would just emphasize that context really, really matters. And I'll be saying that a lot in the next hour.
Well, great. I believe what you have said gives us a really good start to hopefully a very productive session. So, Joanne, now that you've had a lot of experience, uh, what's your thoughts on relevance?
I think this is a really interesting word. Often in the corporate world, we hear the word relevant, or we hear maybe the word valued or feeling valued. And for me, they're very, very different words. Even kind of growing up, children can feel relevant or valued or not either of those things. And then when you get into the corporate environment, you might feel valued but not relevant, or relevant but not valued. So I'm really looking forward to diving into what this means, and particularly from my perspective in the corporate world, because I think we can make everybody that we come across every day feel valued and also relevant. Relevant in the context of the situation, Charles, like you mentioned, or relevant to the job, or relevant to the relationship. It's not just about feeling valued. So I think there's a lot to this topic, and I'm really looking forward to diving in.
Well, that was great, Joanne, uh,
Mhm.
adding so much more to where we started.
Mhm.
Catherine,
Well, I really appreciate being here, and I also appreciate what's been said so far because I believe that the context is crucial. And what's interesting about that is perspective comes to mind as well, because what's relevant to you might not be relevant to me because of my perspective, and vice versa, right? And so it's fascinating how um, perspective falls in, comes into play almost always. And because of other people's experiences, they don't look at things the same way. And the other thing that's fascinating about this, as far as feeling relevant, um, a person's opinion of themselves, their feelings of self worth, come into play also. So we have a lot of variables when we think about, relevance, right?
absolutely. And Charles has a great point. Welcome. Be sure to say hi. Tell us from where you are watching. Stay positive. Good vibes only,
I
for
love that.
sure. To kind of add to what's been said, there is a lot of context to relevance.
Mhm.
And I think the primary context is why. Why do I want to keep doing whatever I'm doing it doesn't make me feel more relevant, which in a lot of ways is either relatable to other people or being involved in something you think you have value to and from.
Mhm.
I think that's so important because if you don't feel relevant, everything you're doing doesn't seem very relevant.
Mm.
And everything you might be doing doesn't seem very relevant. But the beauty of it is we can all change. And sometimes it might be just a compliment to what we've been doing and becoming more relevant now.
Mm.
Absolutely, communication has to play a role. So, with that, Charles?
Yeah, I think that relevancy is the currency of impact. You know, it's not about chasing trends, but it's about really deeply understanding and adapting to the evolving needs of the people that you serve. And your ability to stay relevant, or one's ability to stay relevant, is directly tied to their commitment to continuous growth and their focus on providing massive value, which we've talked about before, not just once, but consistently being net producers of value. So market technology, people's needs are always shifting, and if you're not growing, you're dying. Relevancy is about being liked. It's not about being liked. It's about being useful and mastering your craft and solving the new and pressing problems. And if you do that, you'll never have to worry about being relevant. I loved where JD left off on my LinkedIn Live earlier today. A lot of people worry about the algorithm and are they being relevant to the algorithm on LinkedIn or other social media. And what JD was saying was be your own algorithm. Be authentic, be vulnerable, be yourself, and you will be your own algorithm that will meet the other algorithm. And it doesn't matter if you're being authentic and you're being yourself and you're listening to what's out there, what people want to hear, that will connect you to being relevant.
Yeah, I noticed that too with JD's last comments. And, I think that speaks to trying to impress people besides yourself with something that they're probably not going to be very impressed with. But we've got a great individual in the audience, Omar, who also came out to Denver to visit me and had dinner together. Hello, all. Good morning. Great to see you all. Put almost everybody on this show on his show. So it's nice to learn and share together. Omar has Zoom Party, which is a Jeopardy kind of takeoff, as well as Do You Know, whoever it is that Omar's talking to. So thanks for joining, Omar. Always good to see you. And look who's here, my good buddy, Leslie Flowers. Two ladies. Is this a first? No, you've been with Catherine. And we've actually had three women at one time too. So we're always stretching the boundaries and the limits. And Leslie's just a wonderful individual, great colleague on LinkedIn, is responsible for Carousel, which continues to grow bigger and bigger and gain more importance, which is, what a lot of people, including Charles and Omar, use to publicize our live streams. So we're live streaming among live streamers. So thanks for being here, Leslie. I know you'll be full of questions, which is the first one here. I listened to the whole live with JD, so I'm going to log off. If this is a topic, let me know, please. No. What topic would you like to talk about, Leslie? Of course.
Dawn is creating relevance.
Yeah, we're looking to include you. So yeah, stay tuned, have some questions, move the conversation. That'd be a great thing. I forgot where I left off.
With Joanne.
Joanne, thank you, Catherine. Joanne.
One thing I love about this format that you have here, Don, is that everything we all say kind of just triggers something in someone else's mind, and maybe that's relevance in itself. I'm not quite sure. But what came up for me with what Charles said about impact is, I believe, what are we in life if not the impact we have on other people? And if we're not feeling relevant within our relationships or with the people that we are engaging with, maybe, who's it up to find that relevance? I would imagine that it would be us. It's us that need to find the relevance and the truth in our lives. And if we can't find it immediately, maybe we should just keep looking, because no doubt it's there. I know that there's a lot of people around my sphere that have kind of been lost in their careers lately. And, they've come to a crossroads and they're not quite ready to retire, but they're also in a situation where they could, if they wanted to, maybe, but they still feel that they have some tread in the tires, so to speak, and they're seeking relevance. Many of them have come from positions or roles where they have been extremely relevant, and then all of a sudden they're not working anymore, and they're like, well, now how am I going to find that relevance in my life? And, a lot of it, I think, is coming through continued learning, particularly in the AI space. But I think it's a really interesting time with so much change going on around the world, particularly as it relates to the technology that we're using every day, that we're all just trying to find relevance. And maybe when we do find it, we're still trying to find more. I'm not sure. I'd love to hear what others think on that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you, Joanne.
Mhm.
Uh, we've got Leslie who wants us to talk about Leslie. And relevant as it is expression of the concept of mastermind in real time. Gave us a good laughter, Leslie. Stay tuned. Catherine.
Well, it is really interesting was when we talk about perspective and adaptability. What's fascinating if you look at all of this from an energetic level, and everything is shifting, as Charles mentioned. Everything is changing constantly, and the universal energy is always in motion. So relevance yesterday might not be the same relevance today, right? And I believe that it is up to us. What came to mind when you were talking, Joanne, was the self responsibility to evaluate. And I think evaluation is a huge part of this, because if I thought that something was relative yesterday, or I was relative to a certain project, and that focus had shifted, does it still matter, right? And I think that that's part of it also. How important is it? And do I want to continue to be important with that process? Or have I gone on a different energetic level and there's not really a match any longer?
Excellent insights. Appreciate it. I look at it as relevant to what? A lot of people are thinking relevant to success, relevant to whatever you want to put on it. But how do you stay relevant once you achieve some level of relevancy? And I think sustainability makes a difference, right? If you're relevant for a trend, you're going to have to find the next trend and relate to that. Never really get that deep if you're always hopping around. If you're relevant to joy, there's a way of measuring that by how you feel right now or when you're actually active in that. And you can bring that to any workplace, any relationship.
Mhm.
I think people will appreciate and be attracted to you when you bring them joy and
Yeah.
when you radiate joy. No one really cares. They say it's always your music, not your words, that people really listen to. And I think by being relevant to service, bringing value, and also, I think to Joanne's point, being able to move with the trend, right? To stay relevant, you need to find the position you need as new things start to happen so that you're a more cooperative, collaborative individual. And Leslie says sustainability requires consistent practice, I would imagine. I would imagine that too. Charles?
Yeah, so Leslie also asked a question here, relative or relevant? And what we're talking about is relevance, not relative.
Mhm.
And again, I would come back to my point earlier, but I'll dive a little bit deeper into it, that relevancy is a context, not a content issue. So you don't become relevant by consuming more information. You become relevant by creating a context so compelling that information organizes itself around it. And so it's in many ways it's an act of leadership. So true relevancy means causing others to care about what you see as possible. You aren't. We're not echoing the culture. We're shaping it by leading people in a and enrolling people into a new future. And in essence, one of the things we need to be cautious of is that we try to force fit ourselves into what's relevant. Instead, what would be more powerful is to stand for something, and then we will become relevant. That relevance will emerge out of the stand that we take.
Absolutely. We've got Lisa here right now. Thank you, Lisa, for coming. It's always great to see you over and over again. Appreciate your participation. On to Joanne.
What you just said, Charles, is really interesting. And what's coming up for me is it a chicken or an egg thing? Is it what's relevant for me then becomes relevant for others? Or do we need to be curious around what's relevant for others so that we can find more relevancy for them or increased relevancy for us? I'm not quite sure, what what comes first here, because what's coming up for me personally is it's I've got to be curious about what's relevant for other people. Maybe I need to get my crystal ball out, which I have, by the way. No, I'm kidding. I wish I had a crystal ball, but get my crystal ball out and see, what that comes, what that brings about. But for me, it's really being curious about what's going on with other people and trying to find my piece of relevance in what's going on for them so that maybe I can expand their relevance in the process.
Very good. Thank you. Catherine.
I always love talking about curiosity because I think it's such a fabulous skill to develop, and I think it's in something that's innate in all of us, and some of us expand on it, and some of us squash it. Right? And I think the more curious that we can be, the more information we get, and the more information that we have. And of course, filter through that. We have to be discerning. But it gives us a better idea of what am I contributing, and how might I contribute differently.
Great points. And now that I hear what everybody's saying, I look at relevancy as something that relates to your reputation, that kind of precedes you and that you fit, right? It's hard to be relevant and you don't align, fit, or participate in whatever it is. I mean, that almost disqualifies the relevancy question. And legacy comes into play too. How worthwhile was I on earth? How relevant was I to the activities I participated in? And how many people did I help along the way that continues to take things forward, where you get more value for every activity that you participated in. And I think the last thing is learning to be interested and not interesting. And what's in it for them. And if you have something to bring as a gift to someone that they'll appreciate and is relevant to them, well, you'll have a much better welcome and a much better thought afterwards. Leslie says, children have it in diamonds, and then we have them experience it as dull, rediscover the pure diamond. So true. So it shows you there is that flame that's still burning. It just needs that opportunity. Charles?
Yeah, sorry, I had to take myself off mute here to make sure we don't have that echo that we had earlier. Yeah, I think that I love everything that's being said, and I think that the trap of being relevant is that if we're constantly trying to seek relevancy, we're in a perpetual state of reaction and comparison. And the real power lies in declaring what matters and letting reality reconfigure around that declaration. I see here that Leslie has put in a comment that sales requires knowing what is relevant to the client. I would say that's absolutely true. Absolutely true. 100% agree with that. A bit of a devil's advocate I would play around that is, what if the client doesn't know what they need? In Exhibit A would be Apple. None of us knew we needed an iPod until Steve Jobs said, here's an iPod. And then none of us knew that iPhones and mobile devices would turn into the astronomically high-tech devices that they are today until the ground was broken and Steve Jobs effectively said, here's the device of the future. And then everybody had to follow in that. And there's lots of case studies of companies caught off guard. Number one would be Nokia, that was trying to improve and come up with the best, most cost-effective phone, but they missed the beat because Apple came out with mobile devices.
Very good point. Joanne?
Yeah, I think for me, I think, Charles, maybe you said it, John, the gift of relevance. I truly believe that we have in all of us an opportunity to give the gift of relevance to everyone in our sphere, especially our children. I love Leslie's comments that children have it in diamonds, but somewhere along the line, I wonder if they lose it. They lose that feeling of relevance, whether it's through the relationships that they have or circumstances that they find themselves in. It concerns me, and I wonder how many parents out there look at their children as it relates to making them feel not only loved and appreciated and valued, but also relevant. Charles, you might remember we had Anthony Willoughby on the Horizon X live stream a few weeks ago, and he talks about in the tribes how even the 3-year-olds have the responsibility of looking after the tribe's sheep or goats or whatever, as young as 3, and how much the whole village or tribe relies on that 3-year-old to look after the welfare of the animals that are so important to the benefit of the whole tribe. I see Leslie said it gets dull and their curiosity wanes, Joanne. That's very possible. Absolutely. But I think it's in all of us to make everyone around us feel valued and appreciated and relevant, especially the smaller children that are around us.
For sure. Catherine?
When you were talking, Charles, and you were talking about, the advance in technology, it made me think of systems that are outdated, right? And it wasn't that long ago, I was talking to a young man who I believe was in 5th grade, and he was parroting things that he was required to memorize, things that I was doing when I was in grade school. And of course, when I was in grade school, there wasn't all this reference material available. I mean, you can look up all these things in a nanosecond almost, right? And there's no need to be stuck in that trench. And so I believe that, in some of the systems, what is happening there is not relevant any longer.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point, Catherine, because in essence, relevance is re-education. And if you look at people who had trouble learning in school or school wasn't a good fit for them, they can now not worry about what they didn't learn because all that isn't relevant anymore. And now they start learning at the very beginning or maybe in advance of everybody else. So it's also a way of retooling, is upgrading. And with the focus on bringing more value to more people to stay relevant. Because if no one knows you, no one's ever heard of you, you're not relevant. And in this social media age, you can be totally relevant for a week and be irrelevant for the rest of your life. So Omar has a comment. Yes, being curious is always a great idea. we will become a little curious, George. I think the chicken comes before the egg. Leslie says what they hear repeatedly from friends and family and repetition creates their self-image.
Mhm.
And, you know, there was a study that I read that by the time a child turns 5 years old, they've heard 20,000 no's and 5,000 yeses.
Mm.
And if you can change the balance to provide more yeses, like, oh, that was so nice of you not to touch the stove, instead of don't do this and don't do that, that makes a difference. But it carries forward beyond kids who are 5 years old. Everybody likes a pat on the back. Everybody likes to be recognized and appreciated, because you become more relevant when they feel more relevant around you. And I think that's an important distinction. Charles.
I think with children, they lose their agency. When they're young and they're curious, creativity arises from being curious, not from trying to be creative. And over time, when they hear the 20,000 no's, the 5,000 yeses, they hear repetitive messages, as Leslie says in the comments. So when children learn to perform for approval, for grades, for praise, for avoidance of punishment, they disconnect from their authentic expression. And that creativity gets crushed by fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of not fitting in, or fear of failing. And I think our job is to create environments of absolute certainty where taking smart risks and a wild imagination is not just safe, but it's celebrated. And you look at some of the leading edge entrepreneurs and startup companies that are out there really, really pushing the envelope on innovation, disruption, technology, and they love the word fail. We have expressions like fail forward, fail fast, fail 50,000 times, and you'll get the solution. And that's missing in the typical context that a child is being raised in. They are being raised in the 20,000 no's, the repetitive messages that Leslie talks about, and it grinds them down, and they lose that, and the curiosity wanes. That's exactly how Leslie describes it.
Very good. Joanne?
What's coming up for me with this conversation so far is, I just wrote it down, do entrepreneurs find relevance quicker?
Mhm.
We talked about Steve Jobs a little bit, and, we hear of other people, that entrepreneurs that are multimillionaires or even billionaires, and they either dropped out of college or, dropped out of school early. And it's not because they're not smart. It's because, maybe that environment wasn't the right environment for them at that particular point in time. But I'm starting to wonder if they were not finding the relevance in their lives under that schooling environment, and found more relevance in their lives in their curiosity and their entrepreneurship. And from that, have created an opportunity for a lot more relevance for other people.
Very good point. Thank you, Joanne. Catherine?
It is fascinating because what you were just talking about, Joanne, because I agree with you on that. I'm a nurse by profession. I've been a nurse for quite some time. And when you think about being in the the old institutions of, the hospitals and how they're set up, and all of these things, there certainly is room for innovation, but sometimes the old policies are outdated, but yet you're still mandated by that. And I think that's typical in education, and you see it in the politics. What's fascinating is when you also think about creating change and being relevant and creating new neural pathways. And when people are just haranguing on the same thing over and over and over and over, there aren't any new neural pathways being created. And so let's take a look at that, because I think that fluidity, right, and adaptability that we mentioned earlier is definitely a requirement.
Yeah, absolutely. And, my life has been spent in entrepreneurship. And I think entrepreneurs are able to get tunnel vision when they need to. and block out all the distractions and all the critics and all the noise. You know, the saying, if it's going to be, it's up to me, you know, really lends itself to responsibility and accountability, right? So the more you can be responsible, the less you have to be dependent. And I think dependency is something that really drags down entrepreneurs as well as most other people. And it's seeing a vision and having the persistence and the tenacity to follow that vision to fruition. And there's too many people get excited too quick and lose interest too fast also. So I think it's really one step at a time and enjoying the journey, even though knowing it's not going to be as positive as it could have been for others. So we've got Leslie who says, nurse, yes, stage, television, and screen actor, yes. I learned that too, Leslie, the other night at dinner. So great insights, multi-talented. Omar says, I know this is not on child development. How does one raise kids in a peaceful way without fear and make them relevant in our times? Well, that's a $64,000 question that's been asked forever. I guess you got to know the kids, and the kids got to get to know you. Not all kids are the same. And environment, culture, and opportunities, right? I mean, if you miss it, something, it says, well, here's another shot, you're back in the game. If you fear missing out, you play a more safer game, and it doesn't lend itself to the best trajectory. Charles.
Yeah, I will tackle that question from Omar. I would say that we are constantly modeling leadership as adults. We are constantly modeling to people around us, but especially to children around us. And when children observe adults stuck in their ruts, as Leslie described it, and in case you don't know what a rut is a grave with the ends knocked out. But if they observe us stuck in our ruts, complaining, blaming, or avoiding responsibility, they will then internalize a model of life as something to be endured, not created. So that's the first thing. And the other thing is a lot of our language impacts children. So if we speak in a fixed mindset, and I know there's a whole lot of debate about pushing growth mindset too much with children, that they lose resilience and things like that. But I do think there's a lot of power in what we say. If we're speaking largely with a growth mindset for children, then we'll be encouraging their creativity as opposed to a fixed mindset which starts to block it into a blocks. Mm-hmm. And I also think that we don't want to teach creativity. We want to encourage creativity by restoring the context for creativity. So, you know, where not knowing is being honored, where being curious is being honored, where questions matter more than answers, and where the child's perspective is listened to not as cute, but as legitimate. You know, there's a lot of wise things that come out of children's mouths. And the creativity was never gone. It's just waiting under the rubble of conditioned behavior. And it reminds me of, you know, the basics of life often get learned in early years of school. You know, there was that one famous book, Everything I Learned in Life, I Learned in Kindergarten, which was a business bestseller.
Very important points. Thank you, Charles. Joanne.
Yes, I think for me it comes back to what Catherine mentioned earlier about, well, two things that Catherine mentioned actually. One's about perspective. And I think if we see children in our lives, not necessarily as children, but the future adults that they will become, then I think that our perspective changes very, very quickly in terms of how we interact and engage with them as future adults or little adults, so to speak. And knowing that, to Charles's point, every single interaction that we have with them is creating a neural pathway that is either going to work for them in the future or work against them and create either creating the certainty and the relevance and the appreciation and all of those positive things, or the I'm not worthy path, or I'm not interesting, or I'm not valued, or I'm not important path. And I think that a lot of adults, when they're interacting with their children or with children in general, potentially don't have that perspective. They're very, to Don's point, very reactive rather than proactive in how they want to interact and engage, knowing that every single interaction that they have with them is molding this future adult that they will become. So, and I guess on another point, Catherine, you were mentioning, when you're at school, they're still learning, the same things today. I know my daughter has, she's just started college, but there's so much in her high school education and middle school education, et cetera, that has just been so irrelevant to her life. And I think that there really is an opportunity for us to rethink the curriculums that are available to our children and start talking to them about not only the pragmatic side of things like budgeting and communication and relationships, but also the feeling of relevance and the impact that feeling relevant has on the human brain and our ability to grow into the people that we are meant to grow into in the most positive of ways. I think that maybe the education system might be a little bit more valued and, dare I say it, relevant.
I think you can. We'll
Yep.
pause. Mother
Yep.
gets everybody laughing. That's always a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of laughter.
Yeah.
Catherine?
Oh, I'm right there with you on that. Oh my gosh. What's interesting too is I've studied a lot of things, and I have always said, and I'm still sticking to it, is that I feel that I learned the most growing up with my kids. And I thought it was my responsibility to, expose them to as many experiences as I could. Let's go out in the woods for the day and learn how to use a compass. And did we get lost in the beginning? Oh, yeah. But, that was part of the experiment, right? And it's amazing how now in the work that I do with people, so much of it is very much health related. And that gets back to the neural pathways and the ultimate mind diet and, the self-fulfilling prophecy of how we talk to ourselves. And all of this comes into play and comes down to the self-worth. It's fascinating how we do develop differently because of our environments. So I think that we have to also look at the study of epigenetics and how we react to our environment. And I think that plays into, are we relevant or not?
Yeah, great points. I want to just mention that Dave's in the audience. Dave's usually here on the show. So sorry to miss you, Dave, but it's great to have you. And, getting back to relevance, a lot of times you need feedback to understand your relevance.
Yeah.
You can only assume so much. And if you don't include somebody in your overview of your relevancy, then you're kind of missing opportunities to become more collectively relevant than just as an individual or independent relevancy. Today, we're building relevancy by cobbling together ideas and thoughts and conversation related to just a simple word or concept. But it took all four of us to figure it out and help the other person with some clues and then bring the audience in. And now you got a full rounded approach to relevance that people can take something home, so it's almost like a drive-through for relevancy today. So I'll move it over to Charles.
Well, one thing I want people to take home is the state of play. We've talked a lot about kids losing creativity. I think what I'm about to say is relevant to adults as well. You can't connect creativity, you cannot disconnect creativity to a child's or an adult's physical and emotional state. You can't access a creative state from a stressed, overwhelmed, or sedentary physiology. Motion creates emotion. Get people moving, playing, and laughing to unlock their natural innovative genius. We saw this in the pandemic where, a lot of people were trapped inside homes in lockdown, some countries longer than others, some countries shorter than others. And the phrase, sitting is the new smoking, was the tagline of the day. And everybody, it was all about how do you stay well. And this is really important, if people need to manage their well-being, because context drops out almost instantly when people get overwhelmed with stress and all the things that's going on in our daily lives and all the noise that's out there. It's very, very easy to lose context and to lose relevancy. We tend to get more entrapped by our stories when we're tired, when we're stressed out, when we're overwhelmed, and not stay fixated and not stay on what we stand for, or stay focused on the facts of the time.
Very good. Joanne?
What's coming up for me, pardon me, John, is the maybe the relevance drive-through has stuck, because I wonder if we can all be the relevance in other people's lives that they need, right? And I guess the visual that's coming up for me is, if a friend calls you or you call a friend, during the course of that conversation, how are you getting a sense of relevance, and how are you giving them a sense of relevance? If you're sending an email or you have an interaction with your kids that have just come home from school, how are you that relevance drive through? How are you providing them the sense of relevance that they need to hold their head up a little bit higher, or puff their chest out, or feel a little bit better about themselves in this crazy world that we live in? And I truly believe that could just be, it could be a smile, it could be a look, it could be a nod, it can be anything that you feel that they need in that moment to feel, I'm okay, I'm relevant, I'm at peace with the world and the relationships that I have in it. Because that they're not going to have maybe a lot of those experiences. Maybe they will. I don't think so, though. I would imagine that there's a lot of experiences that we have where we're seeking that relevance, but that perspective of relevance is not coming back to us. So be that relevance drive through for other people. Be the relevant observer for other people in your lives, and then just see what happens to the relationship, because I would hazard a guess that it would potentially change the relationship in the most positive of ways, even if it's already great, and or create a better experience for yourself.
Yeah, I like that. Very good, Joanne. Catherine?
Well, I love that you brought up about the emotional intelligence of it all, right? And because I think that it makes such a beautiful difference. I also think that there are different elements that are required for people or events or habits to be relevant, right? When you look at just at self-care, for instance, and the self-care that's really required to be effective is much more than the commercialized version of self-care. And I think when people understand the relevance or the importance of not only how they speak to themselves, also what they choose to eat, their activity, it all comes into play in developing a whole, and what I call a conscious contributor. And I think the more conscious that we can be, the more relevant we can be.
Yeah, for sure. And, I look at it like Wheel of Fortune is buy as many vowels as you can before you solve the puzzle. And I think, to be very relevant, you need to inquire, you need to listen. Because if you only have so much time with that individual, what is on their mind? What is their primary need? Because by offering safety and support, whether it's for kids or colleagues, is so important because that develops trust. And trust really is the underpinning to relevancy, right? If no one believes what you say or who you are or what you do, it doesn't really matter anymore. You've lost it. You know, you might be trying to imitate it and start it over again. But, you know, again, what's in it for them is a key point. What can I do to help you for the time I'm with you? To Joanne's point, a lot of people are just like a glass of water. And that keeps you more than relevant, you know, or keeps you by their side, which keeps you more than relevant. So the quiet things sometimes are the most important things. Yeah, people like to be heard. They like to be recognized and they like to be appreciated. And sometimes you don't know how funny a joke is until someone tells you, right? Or how quality a song you might be singing until someone says, wow, that's just the best I've ever heard today, you know, maybe for a day. But the important thing is you were heard, you were appreciated, you were supported. And that's probably a lot more than the average visitor or colleague may give you. And that starts to distinguish you and differentiate you from a standpoint of looking forward to seeing you. And I think relevancy is when people can't wait for you to show up in the office or can't wait to see you somewhere to hear what's new, what's exciting, because you always bring something new and exciting. And people like to feel better and they like to do business with people they like. Charles.
Yeah, thank you. So I have an example of relevancy, and I'm going to give a shout out to Joanne, actually. So one thing people may not know is that Joanne has recently written a book called Game On. And can you still hear me okay?
Mhm.
Yep, okay. And one of the things, as I listen to the conversation, Joanne, I think that your book is a good example of creating relevancy for aspiring managers and leaders. Because you paint the context in your book about what does it take to be a really effective and inspiring manager. What's the responsibility? What's a manager accountable for? And that creates relevancy for people who want to move on to that level or who are at that manager or leadership level and want to become more effective managers and leaders. So I think that we have an example of relevancy published right here in the panel.
Great.
It's amazing the talent we have in front
I know.
of Joanne.
Thank you, Charles. I'll give my book a plug too. It's Game On is Management, Your Best Career Play. That was just published in March of this year. And it's funny, Charles, that you mentioned that, because what I'd written down here with what Don was saying was, what does it feel like to feel relevant? And that is, I mean, I don't think it was a conscious thing, to be honest, when I was writing the book. But what I'm ultimately aiming for is for everybody to feel relevant in their lives, and managers in particular to feel relevant as great managers in the context not only of the relationships that they have with their teams, but with their peers, and also in the context of the broader organization that they work for or work with. You know, it's got to be everywhere around them. And not only that, to step into a management role with their eyes wide open, knowing exactly what the role entails, rather than the typical trust fall exercise that most people go through when they are promoted to management, so that when they do get in the role, that they are aware of the impact that they're having on people that are working with and for them, and that it is important for them to acknowledge other people's relevance in the context of them working together. So I do think that there was this underpinning feeling when I wrote the book of just wanting everybody to feel relevant, because I just, in my own corporate experience, I think I'd noticed that a lot of people maybe weren't. So.
I think it's very good identification.
Mhm.
Catherine.
Well, I'm really thrilled about your book being published, Joanne. That's great. Yeah. So I'm excited for you on that. Yeah, which is great. And I think that what you're talking about is relevant to what's happening, particularly today. And I like to look at things from an energetic level and always evaluate, what am I broadcasting, right? And what's the broadcast that I'm feeling from other people? Because it's so telling. And, Don, you were talking about, you can't wait for somebody to show up because, they bring life into the room, and that kind of a thing. And attitude has such a huge role that is all part of this. And I think that that's something that people can really take into account when they become more familiar with that angle of thinking, right? Because we are all broadcasting constantly. And if we're not broadcasting an energy that is likable, we're not going to be relevant at all to anyone in that environment. But if we're going in with an open mind and it's just like, oh my gosh, what are we doing today, right? Then you have a lot more opportunity to bring relevance together.
Yeah, absolutely. And what comes to mind is find that common denominator, that common ground where you could meet as an equal, to get away from that parent child, ordering, demanding, setting rules, to where you're happy to meet. And it could be at bowling, it could be at card playing, it could be walking in nature, or it could be in a boardroom, but at least when everybody feels equal and everybody feels respected and trusted, and those are kind of hard, asked for a lot of organizations and situations. Now you're getting true openness and respect, because people feel safe. People feel like someone really wants to hear what they have to say, and they want to hear them, not just only what they have to say. And just the feeling, like Joanne mentioned, of being with someone who makes you feel more of who you want to be,
Mhm.
who shares a lot of your interests, and somebody you can really work with without having to get transactional. And I think that destroys a lot of relevancy, is transaction. Well, if I do it, what do I get? And once you say that, you're measuring instead of really focused on providing the most value. To me, the game plays and the score follows it. And if you play the game right, the score will take care of itself. Uh, Leslie says relevance. Relevant comes up, Joanne, here as being respected. And I think that's a very key characteristic, Leslie, is if you're not respected, how relevant are you? You have to ask yourself that. Charles.
Yeah, as I'm listening here, I'm wondering to myself, is relevance something that we can predict, or is it something that we discover after the fact? Just a bit of a philosophical question there. But I think that, wisdom and relevance may be the core, may be timeless and universal, but they remain abstract and meaningless until we see them embodied in real life. And then maybe that's what relevance is. It's taking timeless truths and timeless wisdom and applying them in context and acting them out in real life.
Yeah, I think so too. Joanne?
Yeah, I'll take that one step further. I'll say relevance is a verb, right? I don't think it's looked upon like that. It's maybe looked upon more as a feeling, that we have, or and maybe an adjective or a descriptor. But it's for me, it's a verb. And I know, even with my own upbringing, that it just took one person in my life, which was not necessarily my parents, to make me feel relevant and worthy and okay about myself. And it only takes one person. There's a lot of research into this, no matter how challenging our upbringings might have been, if you have one person that believes in you. And I know definitely throughout my career too, I could name the bosses as the managers that I've had. There's one on this panel that have made me feel relevant and important. And those people you never forget, ever, throughout your whole existence. And I think that that's pretty remarkable. It's a pretty remarkable opportunity that we have to have someone in our lives, to have someone that makes us feel relevant. Because if someone else thinks it, then maybe it's true, even if I don't think it myself.
Absolutely. Great point. Thank you, Joanne. Catherine?
Oh, Joanne, I love what you were talking about with relevance being an action word, right? Because I agree with you on that. I think that, and because of that, it's always fluid. And I do also agree with you that it only does take one person. I know when I was growing up, Helen she was not a member of the family. She lived kitty corner across the four corners. And I grew up in this very, very little tiny hamlet in upstate New York on a farm. And Helen was fabulous. And I spent an awful lot of time with her when I was growing up, and she was very meaningful in my life. She lived to be 100. And in fact, I've known several people that have lived to be 100, and they attribute their longevity to being curious and to being in that action state. So isn't that so interesting? I think that there's a real correlation there.
Yeah, I think all together we've kind of demonstrated what we've been talking about is repeating what someone else has said, respecting the kind of new information that's been brought to the table, and assisted us in formulating our own share that we came up with. So, they say nothing's ever owned, it's always borrowed. And, and to Joanne's point of being that significant person who may not know how significant they were to you. So I think the responsibility we all have is to have them remember what it was that made so much of a difference. And they'll probably relate to that, but it also is validating and confirming to them, even though their intent may not have been that, to really make a huge impact. When they hear they did, it makes it all worthwhile. And I think that's where relevance gets proven is, was it worth it? And the other last thing, and it's, is relevant to what? If you're not relevant to AI, you're going to be it used to be relevance to yourself. Now it's relevance in combination with what's going on around you. It's almost like musical chairs with less chairs and faster music is how do you get that seat again? So these are wonderful questions we all can ask ourselves and learn from and grow from, but help others. Because if you can't win, can you help somebody else win until you get it together so you can win? Be around winners, be around people who are striving to be better, do better. And I think that's a wonderful goal. Last thoughts, Charles, and we'll go around the horn real quick.
Yeah, I'm just looking at Omar's comment. We always remember the ones that uplift us, and we rise by lifting others. And we can't lift others unless we know what's relevant for them. We need to understand how can they benefit from being lifted? How can we serve them? And I would just encourage people to remember that context matters, and always keep that in mind.
Very good. Joanne?
I guess I would just close by saying, be the relevance in other people's lives, even if they don't see it themselves.
Good point.
And that gentleman I was referring to before was obviously Charles Caldwell, who was my manager at Juniper, and I will always be very appreciative of that. And by the way, Charles, you're the reason I'm here today, and I've had an absolute wonderful time chatting with you all. So thank you very much for inviting me on today. It's been a really interesting conversation. I've enjoyed every second. So thank you, Don. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Charles.
Well, thank you, Joanne. It was a pleasure and an honor to have you today. Catherine.
Well, I think this whole conversation is all of us wanting to be relevant, right? To contribute to the conversation with all of us. And how fun is that, really?
Yeah, for sure. And, inclusion goes a long way towards relevancy, and sharing and caring and loving goes a long way too. So with that, I want to thank everybody, especially the audience and the panel. Come back next week. We'll do it all again with another word. Feel free to send a word to me, and I'll more than consider it as the word of the day next time or the time after next time. So with that said,